Just waiting for the. This is always an awkward moment, waiting for the stream to run. I have the green light, but it doesn't say that it's got any content. Ah, there we go. Let me just send this old tweet off. And good. Close that down. Well, hello once again. This is obviously a Wednesday. Wednesday means live stream day. I hope you are all well. Hope you're having a good week. And have been creating some interesting things in code. For anyone who doesn't know, anyone new here, we've got a raft of new subscribers, which is great. Welcome, everyone. Get a seat, get comfortable. My name is Peter Fisher. I'm a freelance web and mobile applications developer. I've been a developer for about 12 or so years. Before that, I was obviously studying programming and system design and so forth, 6 years. So I've been a coder for a while. I'm a freelancer, and and usually what happens is on a Tuesday we do a tutorial where I will do a tutorial which is part of a course. And at the moment we're doing Python and Python control structures. It's very beginner friendly. And then after that, on the Wednesday, we have a live stream. It used to be Web Developers Working Week, and it kind of still is, although it's morphed into this sort of live stream affair where I talk about what I've been getting up to on a weekly basis as a freelancer, but also talking about the just general things in code. And then on the Friday, we have a pre-recorded sort of episode where I talk about just general things that I'm interested in code. Last week we did the new, or the possible new feature coming into PHP 7.4, which is the typed properties in PHP OOP. Yeah, it's just basically a way of me to talk about these new things and these challenges and just talk about coding and web development in general. So hello, everyone. Like I said, I hope you're all doing fantastically well. So this week has been, or since last Wednesday to this Wednesday, I'm not going to lie, it has been a little bit of a rough one in terms of freelance. And I'm not going to go into all of the ins and outs because that would be highly unprofessional. But what I'm going to do is just say that, there's a lot of YouTubers who will talk about freelance and they'll dress it up in some sort of glossy type thing and they'll sell it to you as freelance is the way forward. It's the thing to do. However, I'm not here to talk. I'm not here to sell you freelance. If you want to be a freelancer, then go for it. If you don't want to be a freelancer, that's perfectly fine. I'm not going to judge you either way. But as a freelancer and as a Wednesday show where I talk about freelance, I want to be true to you guys. I don't want to just say it's all shiny and roses. So this week, it was a bit rough, and it basically. It kind of like, it's not, so you're not always, yes, you're creating systems and you're creating code that interacts with systems, but you're also having to deal with personnel. You're dealing with people, and at the end of the day, they are the things that matter the most. The client and the client's needs, and so on and so forth. So it has been a little bit of not a turbulent time. It's just been a little bit awkward this week. I'm not going to go into any kind of depth as to why, but I just want to just kind of sort of not gloss over it and not say that freelance is fantastic, because you do get these bumps in the road from time to time. And I'll probably talk about it in a more of an abstract, generic kind of way. I'll probably come up with some analogies as to these things, and I'll probably do that later down the road. But I just want to kind of put a stake in the ground and say that it's not all fun and games. So anyway, let's just move on from that, because whatever. That was only like literally about 2% of my week. So the rest of the week was working on Lambda scripts in AWS. And I have to say that the more I use AWS, and I've been using AWS in a lot of clients, but the more in bed the client is with AWS, the more, well, I kind of think, oh, this is a bit of a concern, right? Because you're putting all of your eggs in one basket. But AWS is fantastic because it is itself its own ecosystem, and when all the things in the ecosystem work really well, then you've got a fantastic system. But I'm always kind of looking at the alternatives, because I don't want to be that typecast AWS freelancer, because there are other things out there that can do what certain clients want to achieve in a far cheaper and more efficient way than AWS. But one of the clients that I've got is highly involved in AWS, and so I've been working on a lot of Lambda scripts. And it's been fantastic because we've managed to carve a huge portion of a legacy application into a series of Lambda scripts, which means that the responsibility of actually hosting that code is no longer a concern, which is just one of several benefits of Lambda. And essentially what you are creating is an endpoint, an API endpoint, which is fantastic. And it kind of segues off a little bit into another thing that I want to talk about today, and that is clean code and getting your code as clean as possible. And what is the point of having clean code? What is the deal here? I've just had a notice saying that the video output is pretty low, so I do hope you're seeing this okay. But we're going to talk about clean code later on in today's stream. Other things that I've been working on is a lot of CSS using a lot of Sass, which has been a very sort of, once you've done the Sass, once you've created Sass, it's very good because you can configure it, right? You can change the variables and so forth. The actual implementation of Sass, though, it is just trying to wrap your head around what the variables should be, what your naming convention should be. That is quite a large piece of work. However, once you've done that, and once you're comfortable with that, once you have a script of things that you can, like I said, change the variables, and then that has lots of effects on the CSS, then that is extremely powerful. And it's one of those things that you have to do the legwork first, and then you've got yourself a very slick piece of CSS. Hey Claudio RDZ, hope you're well. And so that was the CSS. I did a lot of Lambda. I've been doing all sorts of Docker stuff recently. Like today, I wrote a script that will generate and deploy 7 will be 8 by next week containers from a single script, which is fantastic, and just a tremendous amounts of documentation writing. Because the thing is, when you're writing systems, building systems, and you're creating infrastructure, when you're creating ways of building systems, you need to document all of this stuff, because it isn't just you doing this, it's the other people on the team, right? So there's been an awful lot of documentation. What I like doing is sort of like writing the documentation out as much as I can do, tear everything down, so remove everything, uninstall everything, and then work from scratch, because that way you can identify the holes in the documentation. And there's been loads. There's been like, oh, I forgot that it's actually this version of Python that is needed to run NPM. Like, that was an issue I had earlier, because I went from one laptop to another machine, and I realized that one was a Python 3.4 and one was Python 2.7. And for some reason, the the Sharp, I think it's called the Sharp. Is it Sharp? It's an NPM package, just did not support the version of Python that I was running. So, it's always good to tear down everything, run it on a different machine, and there you go. But anyway, that's beside the point. So that is basically what I've been working on, and I'll be continuing on that kind of DevOpsy type stuff as well. There has been an element of PHP code to this week, not as much as I would have liked, but there has been mostly API changes. Over the weekend, however, I have done quite a bit of work with the howtocodewell.net website. So you could be watching this from there, and if you are, hello. That has a live section on there. It also has previous live streams, and as I've mentioned before, the website was originally all static, and a large portion of it is still static, as in just raw HTML. And I'm in the process of sort of stripping it out, making it more dynamic, and using other external services and so forth. So that will slowly come. But it's one of those things where a lot of groundwork has happened, but not a lot of sort of, realistic sort of visual changes are apparent. So, and that is something that, as a freelancer, it is something that is constantly a battle that you have to sort of like say to the client, look, it's going to take a long time to actually build these things, but once the foundation work is done, then I am able to create the features that you wish more efficiently. So, for example, the fact that we now have a grid of videos, that piece of functionality is going to be used on other pages. I'm putting in a pagination widget or thing on that, and that will be used throughout the other pages. And it's written in a way that I can just sort of like call upon it in other pages. So once it's written, it's written. But actually writing those things from scratch, as in replacing the static HTML and actually making a system where it's making certain calls to different services and so forth, the actual legwork of doing that is it takes a long time. And the problem I have with the howtocodewell.net site, and just How to Code Well, this thing in general, is that this isn't my full-time job. So I'm obviously a freelancer, and so this stuff that I do is what I do in the spare time. And it's kind of like the stuff that is I've got lots of plans that I want to do with this channel, this website, and so forth, but it is just a case of trying to fit it in with everything else and life. It's not as quick to fruition as I would like, but hey, it's one of those things. It will happen. I am my own client, so I know how much work I've done and how much work I need to do. So that is good. So that's pretty much it. I should also say that the AWS S3 course, I have actually put that as a Udemy course, created that as a Udemy course and a Skillshare course. So if you're interested, the links are in the show notes below to pick those up. So if you're interested in learning AWS S3 on the command line, then do check those out. I'm going to be porting the first few tutorials on YouTube, but then I won't be pushing the rest. So the rest will only be for Patreons, for Udemy, and for Skillshare. So do check that out if you're interested in AWS S3 command line. Okay, I'm just going down my notes here. Let's just have a regroup. I'm just going to grab some. I'm drinking Earl Grey. I do like a bit of Earl Grey. So, clean code. Let's get on to that. Let's talk about clean code. Let's talk about why you need clean code. What is clean code? And by the opposite of clean code, what is dirty code, right? What is messy code? What is code that is just stinky, smelly code? What is that all about? People say the cleaner your code, the easier it is to work on. But knowing what is clean code and what isn't clean code is kind of a gray area to some. And I think it all comes down to experience. Knowing what makes something cleaner, makes something more efficient, makes something a little bit more performant. That is all the things that make up clean code. So you can write code, 101 ways. You could write something that in so many different ways that still do the same thing. However, the sort of the quality of the code is justified, is discovered when you come to maintain that code. Now, so if someone says, what do you do as a job? Often or not, programmers will say, I write code. But in actual fact, we hardly write code at all. If you were to count how many characters of syntax you read compared to how many characters of syntax you write on a daily basis, I guarantee you that you're reading code more than you're writing code. And in fact, when you go ahead and write code and there's like an issue, a bug with that, you then reread the code that you've written, right? You also read things like log files. You also read output from feedback loops. Maybe it's debuggers, all sorts of things. So you are reading more than you are writing. And it's just the way it is. So in fact, when we say we write code, we're actually doing an in-service there. We're actually reading code and we're writing and maintaining and improving code. So when you get into that headspace of you're reading more than you're writing, you want to ensure that your readings, whatever you read, makes sense. Yeah, because it's like if you imagine reading a book that just has no grammar in it whatsoever. It could even be reading one of my tweets, for example. I'm dyslexic, so or one of my Facebook posts. Anyway, so if you're reading something that just doesn't make any sense whatsoever, then how are you going to be able to maintain that or improve that? If someone says to you, right, could you finish my book? I have the last, say, 3 chapters to go. Can you finish the book? So what you have to do is read the whole book to get a sense of the context, the sense of the background, the sense of the story. And then you're challenged to write the last 3 chapters of a book. Now, there could be like 6, 7, 8, 10, 12 chapters that you've already read before you get to that point. And if none of it makes sense, then it's going to be extremely challenging to actually do that justice. So we don't write code as much as we read code, in my opinion, which means that the code that we write must be readable, right? So it's all about how does, the cleaner the code, the easier it is to read. So basically, once it's easy to read, it's easier to maintain. And then when it's easier to maintain, it's then easier to improve. So it's the quality of the code allows you to make changes rapidly, allows you to maintain that. So that's basically what clean code in a nutshell kind of means. It is the cleanliness of the code that allows to do the improvements and the changes and the maintenance. But that doesn't answer what clean code actually looks like. That just says, yes, clean code is fantastic. And that is the thing that we should be striving towards. Clean code is something that, yes, is readable straight away, but it also means that it adheres to standards. It adheres to the principles that have been set out. So, for example, if you're looking at code that has been written by several people, and there's curly braces on new lines. There's curly braces on the end of the parentheses. There is the class names are called different things. Part of it is in camel case, part of it isn't. File names are called completely different things. There basically is zero standardization, zero conformity across the board. That is messy code. Even though we're not necessarily talking about just code, it could be the file names could be completely bonkers. It could be that the namespaces are completely wildly off. They basically, when you're reading something, you want to know exactly what it is fast. You don't want to have to hunt around and discover. So if it's in a namespace, then that namespace needs to do whatever that is, justification. And that is a problem, because this is an extremely it's an art. Making code clean is an art of programming, because usually when you're learning something, you are literally you're looking at a book, or you're looking at a tutorial, or you're looking at a blog post, and you are doing, you're copying and pasting, or you're writing the code line by line, and it's explaining what that is doing, but it's not explaining what you are doing, as in you're trying to fit that example into your world, into the feature that you're doing. And half the time it doesn't, when you see things like my custom class, that kind of thing, and it's like, well, that doesn't mean anything to me. If I was to take on a project and I found my custom class, or my custom namespace, or my custom service, and it's like, well, what does that actually mean? That is messy. That is not telling me exactly what I need to know straight away. Hi, Vinod. Hope you're well. Hope you're doing well. I'm talking about clean code today, and also the other bits and pieces that I've been getting up to as a freelancer. I have a lot of being freelance. I have seen an awful lot of code from various projects, from various companies, from various people, and you can actually, most of it is legacy. Right, most of it is legacy. Most of the time, my clients are working on things that have been created for a long time, and it hasn't been updated or improved in a while. Or they get me in as a resource to improve it, but not to perhaps as in improve the feature, add features, but not necessarily to actually just clean up the code base. Because what client wants someone to clean up the code base? They want people to improve the features, add features, and so forth. And this is kind of where, the refactoring goes in. It's sort of like trying to make things more succinct pieces of code. And I have found that the smaller I go in terms of writing code, the better. I'm not saying that is a key rule here, but when I write things that have singular inputs, singular outputs, that can be sort of written in maybe a sort of a slight abstract way, where I'm not just thinking about what I'm trying to achieve there and then, but I'm also thinking about what this could do in amongst the whole system. So the Unix philosophy is to write things nice and small and well, that do one thing and do one thing well. And that really does stand out when you're reading code. Because if you're reading a function and it's a nice small function that does one thing and does one thing extremely well, then you can chain that function to other functions. And it's the same with classes. If you've got a class that is doing a whole host of different things, like a God class. That's what they call a God class. A God class is a class that does so many different things. Then the actual code is completely obscure to what it should be doing, because you can probably cut that class down into smaller classes, lots of smaller classes, and then you can use proper design principles, proper design patterns to actually orchestrate your objects, rather than having like just lots of mentally big classes that have huge amounts of functions and methods that don't actually mean anything to the class name itself. Doesn't or mean anything to the namespace that class is in. So cleaning code isn't necessarily just the code itself, the syntax. It's also the architecture. It's also the design of the software. So I'll just say that again. The cleaner the code, the easier to read. The easier to read, the easier to maintain. And the easier to maintain, the easier to improve. Because as a freelancer, when I go in and I am asked to improve, as in add new features, if I'm looking at code that is just messy, which hasn't been architected very well, which just is ugly, then it's harder for me to then add to that, because I have to work with the confines of a messy legacy system. However, if it was nicely written, if it was nicely documented, if it was completely obvious what I needed to do in order to add this feature, then it would be so much easier. And as a freelancer, it's often a conversation that I have with a client, because they are interested in time and budget. And if it takes me longer to discover how I should be adding this feature to messy code, then it's obviously going to take the project longer. Therefore, the budget is going to be impacted. So there's a lot of sort of educating the client, and educating those on the team that what we do on the system should never be rushed. We should never be rushed into creating messy code. And it's not something where I kind of like, I point at a developer and I say, you've created messy code, because I create messy code. Everyone creates messy code. Everyone has learnt code, and in that time has created messy code. But without having the opportunity to tidy that up, and the knowledge and the knowledge of what is the impact of that messy code, you're not going to improve. And sometimes you see like agencies or freelancers, they get given a project and they build it and then they go. And then another agency or another coder comes along and then works on that. And so they're having to discover what that previous coder agency has done. And if it doesn't meet certain standards, certain conventions, then it's very awkward to build upon that. Often a client would just assume that you can read code like that and just know exactly what you need to do. And half the time we are investigating, we are trying to work out what it is that has already been done, because what we don't want to do, of course, is we don't want to build something that has an impact, a disastrous impact on a feature that already exists. And this is a saying where, you take a project on and there's zero unit tests, or zero functional tests or API tests or what have you. It kind of puts you in a very difficult position, because you can't say for 100% that your code is not going to impact someone else's code. And that's another point of making things nice and small and contained and confined, because then you know that you can just slot that in wherever it's needed, and it's not having to have this huge overarching impact. It's not using lots of classes from different places all at once. And also configuration. So a lot of times we forget about configuration. We forget about how clean we need to configure things, because you can have messy configuration. You can have a zero documented configuration. And so knowing the keys of the configuration, knowing that you need to change this to do that, that kind of stuff. And it's and one of the challenges we have as programmers is naming things. Naming things is actually an incredibly difficult task, because that name needs to represent what that thing is doing. So it's clean code is one of those things that comes with experience, and it changes once you start writing cleaner code, you can develop quicker. And once you're developing quicker, then the world is your oyster, really. But it's knowing what to do before you do it. So one thing that I was told, in fact, I went to PHP Serbia a couple of years ago, and we were given these T-shirts. Not this. I was actually given. Maybe I was given this T-shirt, but we were given a T-shirt that said, "First solve the problem and then write the code." So often people will just dive in and write code willy-nilly, and they'll put comments all over the place, like, Josh did this at this date, or, change this from here, but don't put this running in production. Those crazy, stupid comments that just don't mean anything to a developer who's actually working on the code. And a lot of the time is actually spent architecting on paper or on a whiteboard, coming up with a solution, thinking about the solution rather than diving straight in and writing the code. Because writing code means that you're kind of committing those ideas to the screen. And the more you can agree with yourself and other people that what you're writing is the correct thing to write, the less chance you're going to have to rewrite it later on. I mean, that to me makes sense. Often, if I don't know how to do something, I won't just hammer it out. I'll go for a walk and I'll think about it in my head. And the solution will slowly come to me when my mind is on something completely different. But I wouldn't want to just suddenly dive straight in and write code, because I need to think about it. And maybe it's something that, maybe it's a failing I have, but I can't, I know that I don't write code as quick as other people, but it's the thinking process. Thinking about the code before I write it is something that I've learnt. And you feel better when you write the code, because you've already gone through it in your head and it makes sense. You're not sort of discovering it. You're not sort of feeling your way through. When you're pushed for time, when you're rushing, you don't want to be feeling your way through. You want to have a plan, and you want to be working through that plan. Hi, Lukey10. Hope you're well. Today we're talking about clean code and all the other stuff, freelancey stuff. I'm just going to grab another drink. Sorry. So that is that. I do think having clean code is the best way of being a better developer. If you can show someone who's never seen your code before, if you can show them your code and they understand it straight away, they know exactly what it's doing, they know exactly what it's not doing, then that is clean. That is a clean code. And if you and other developers will respect you for it, and they'll want to work with you more. The first thing that clients will say to the team is, did you get on with this developer, this freelancer? And there's two outcomes there, either no or yes, and the no is either going to be due to your code or it's going to be due to your personality. What you want to do if you've got a bad personality is you damn well want to make sure that your code is clean. Because they're not going to be wanting to work with you if they can't understand your code. Or if like, for example, one of the companies I worked for as a full-time developer, I worked for Fast Hosts back in the day. We're talking years and years ago. I was working on the control panel for Fast Hosts. And I always remember that there was a time where we were changing parts of a big portion of the code. And we didn't go through the process of deciding the standards of the code that we should be writing. And basically what we ended up doing is calling all the developers back, and rightfully so, and then coming up with the standards, because we discovered that when you've got like 20, 30 odd devs, or I can't remember how much it was, it probably might even be less than that, working on something, or working on the same thing but different portions of that thing. If you don't have any kind of standards in terms of like coding standards, here I'm talking about the PSR stuff for PHP, naming conventions, class conventions, all of that kind of stuff, then it's going to be very awkward, because when you bring everything together, you've now got a mishmash of different coding styles. And there is different coding styles you can write code in so many different ways that all have the same output. And I was speaking to someone not so long ago, I think it was through either Twitter or one of the comments, where I was saying that I found that writing code was comfortable, more comfortable than perhaps designing graphics. Because I was part of my university course was half graphics and half code. I loved the graphics, I loved the multimedia side of it, but I could never, because it was so subjective, I didn't find that comfortable, because I never knew when I should stop. However, when you're writing code, you know when you've got a nicely written piece of function or method that does exactly what it says on the tin. And of course, when you're writing a program, it either works or it doesn't work. So it said that it was off. Just refreshing this, and I'll get back to Luki 10's question. Apparently it's working. I don't know if YouTube just came up with this weird error. I do apologize. Anyway, Luki 10 said, does clean code mean modularity? It does, in the sense that is only one of many things that make up clean code. Yes, you need to have clean code, sure. Yes, you need modularity. But you can go over the top with modularity. You can make things too small and have lots of them, and then it's just a big cluttered mess, right? So, and actually, the smaller you go, the more you're going to have to call, which means that the output is actually the actual code that is calling all of those small things is actually quite huge. So you have to take kind of an educated stance on how small you want to go, how modular it is. However, with the trends these days, where you've got microservices, where you've got micro frameworks, where you've got Lambda stuff, which I was talking about earlier, everything is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, which means that you can then use those again and again and again, but in different ways. In your system. I do apologize. The stream seems to be juttering about like strobe lighting. So I do apologize. So yeah, it does. Modularity is a portion of clean code. However, it's also how you write the code. So, for example, having a variable that only has a single type associated to it. So this is where I'm talking about, like, for example, if you're creating a function and the function returns an array, right? Or let's just say a Boolean. So it returns a Boolean. Fine. And you're returning the value of a variable which is called shoes. I don't know, just made that up. So it's returning something that is called shoes, okay, and it's returning a Boolean. Well, that is messy. Why? Because shoes is plural, and so you would think it would be returning something that is more than one. So I would assume that would be returning, instead of a Boolean, an array or a collection or a tuple or something that has more than one value associated to it. And also when you're returning, say, Booleans, then maybe write the function or the method in a way that explains that you are returning a Boolean. So this is having something that is like, instead of saying if you've got a function that returns whether or not you have shoes, then have the function called has shoes, because you either have or you have not got shoes. So has shoes. Also things like active. Okay, so if you're returning whether or not something is active, then have a function called isActive, because is either true or it's false. So it's not just modularity, it's also how you go about actually writing the code. And you are basically writing a book, basically, that you are going to hand off to someone else to finish the chapters of. So you want to write it in a way that makes sense. So the variables need to be correct. They need to say exactly what the values are and how those values are typed. The functions should also tell you what is being returned. And also the parentheses needs to tell you what the function requires in order to run. And also not mixing types. So, I mean, I know I'm talking a lot about typed languages, and I know that there's an awful lot of untyped languages here, but it just makes code cleaner if you are explaining yourself in the actual syntax that you're writing. So, like, one of the issues I've had with one of my legacy projects recently is that we had one method that was over 22 parentheses. So it went, you had to really widen the IDE to actually see all of the parentheses in it. And it was all jumbled. So you had ones that were default right at the start and the ones that were required right at the end. And so you hacked to actually go through all of the parameters in order to actually get to the one right at the end that you wanted. So your calling code was messy, because you were working on a messy thing. Basically, messy code breeds messy code unless you actually put your foot down and say, look, this needs to be fixed before I even improve it. And this is a stance that I've often taken, because I don't want my name associated to code that is messy. I don't want to have to yes, I've written an awful lot of messy code, but when I come across messy code, I want to fix it. Because it's not just going to make my life easier, but it's going to make the client more appreciative of the features that I can add quicker when I'm working on a cleaner foundation. So yeah, modularity, the way the syntax is written to make sense. Also, comments. And having comments in places that need comments. People go overkill with comments, and it just generates noise. So the comments that I've seen, some of the stupid comments that I've seen are people putting in their initials, right, dating it and saying, don't do this in production. And then giving, like, I don't know, at least 20 blank lines of space before the actual function is, and then another 20 lines of space because they want to work on what they deem as a clean screen, right? So they make these things huge. There's no need for that. You should be doing things in source control, which means that you don't need to timestamp your code. You don't need to say who wrote that code. That is just what you've done. Everybody can see it. It's in source control, right? Other comments I've seen are the comments that you would see in documentation, where it's clearly copied and pasted from some book or some Stack Overflow post, or just something that like a cookbook somewhere on the net. That just is complete noise, because when you're reading it, you really need to do so at a glance and understand exactly what it's doing and trying to achieve straight away. And if you're having to read a comment that was written, say, 5 years ago by someone who's probably just, obviously far better at a programmer now because they've had the experience, then you're just trudging through treacle. It's just noise. It's just, and having huge amounts of spaces between functions just because you don't want your function associated to the function above is just bonkers, in my opinion. So yeah, I've seen all sorts of craziness, and I must say I have written all sorts of craziness. I mean, I've been doing this game for a very, very long time, and I remember when I started, I was making all sorts of mistakes. Everybody does, and that is a point that I would like to just sort of rein home. You shouldn't ever look at a junior developer and shame them. You should never ever say that you are writing messy code and you should be ashamed of writing messy code, because you wrote messy code. You were there when you were learning to code. You're not doing anyone any help. There's no macho-ness in bringing someone down because you're having to deal with code that is messy. The way you should be going about it is an educational way. You know, that they write code that is messy because they don't know any different. So it's your, I'm not going to say it's your responsibility, but that is your opportunity to then say, this is messy code. But if you know, and so if you write it like this, I wouldn't use the word messy code, but you would say something like, if you write it like this, then it would be a little bit easier to read. So Lukey10, this is a very good question, my friend. How can you improve in writing quality code if you don't have a senior developer? Wow, that is a very interesting question. Bear with me, Mo. Okay. Yeah. So one thing I would suggest is try to be around as many people as possible. So try and have as many senior developers around you as possible. And really, the classification of senior developer and junior developer is very blurred, because I know junior developers who are in the classification of junior developers, but they are far senior than some of the senior developers that I know. It's only because they haven't got the confidence themselves to ask for that title. But truly, what is in a name? So how do you go about writing code in a cleaner way, more quality code, without having the support network around you? I would go and say, try and look at courses that teach you clean code. Try and learn through books and documentation. Get books that show you design principles. There is a very good book by Uncle Bob Martin about clean code. So there is things out there that you can read that will teach you how to actually do it. And it's not necessarily just doing it in practice, but it's also having it's a different mindset. Cleaning up your code is a completely different mindset, because if you write code and it just works, then you're just going to go on to the next project, right? But it's actually analyzing what you've written, and it's thinking about what the project needs later on, and is this function too much, too little? Is it not what's asked for it? If you are writing code, then really you should be writing code like there's a psychopath who's going to be looking after that code after you, and he knows where you live. You know, that at the end of the day. Luke 10 says, unfortunately, I work remotely and I am the only programmer in the company. Well, hello. So am I. although the clients that I've got, I do work with other programmers, but it's you shouldn't see that as a issue, a barrier. You shouldn't see that as something that is going to get in your way of improving yourself, because if you wanted to improve the quality of your code, and like I said, there are ways of doing self teaching. It's not going to be as fast as having a developer over your shoulder and taking a look at what you've done. It actually is quite a ballsy move, right? To actually say to someone, I've written this code, can you suggest any improvements? And so because there is the element of fear, there is the element of being shamed. But having that level of confidence is really, really good. And there are ways you could do this. It really depends on the company that you're working for. If you've signed any NDAs or anything where the company is not allowing you to take the code away with you to show to other developers. But you could write on forum posts your code and ask for suggestions. Or something, but really you kind of need someone who needs to have an understanding of what that company is trying to achieve, the features that you're trying to build. But yeah, it is a bit tricky, but it is doable. Also, go to conferences, go to meetups, talk to people about what it is that you're doing. I've learned so much by just standing and listening to people that don't work with me, but they work on projects. And they have tackled problems that I similarly have tackled, right? Or they have been say, like, for example, I went to PHP Southwest not so long ago, and someone there was talking about something, and I found it interesting, but it wasn't what I was working on right now. It had absolutely nothing to do with what I was doing. But they suggested different tools and techniques that have helped me later down the line. So it's sort of like, just because you don't have anyone right now by your side doesn't mean that you can't go out and actually stand by someone, if that makes sense. So go to these meetups, just be a part of the community, and don't let people shut you down. Don't let people don't let people treat you negatively, shame you. There is all sorts of nasty issues with that, where people will shame you because the code that you're writing isn't fantastic, but they really need to understand and appreciate that they were at that position too, but it's just the way that they make themselves puff up and more superior. So there. So yes, clean code is a win. If you want to be a better developer, if you want to write code in a way that is more maintainable, easier to read, easier to improve, then work through the quality of your code, and also do a lot of self-assessment. Also do a lot of evaluation of where you are. What I like doing personally is I like giving myself 3 months to learn something or achieve something. So I will write down a list of things that I want to achieve every quarter in code. So I do this, 1, for my business, 2, for the actual learning of technology, because technology moves so fast, you need to get on it, but also and also with life and fitness and all of that jazz. But you can actually say, look, the code that I have created, say 3 months ago, I'm going to evaluate in the next 3 months. And what I've learned in the following 3 months, I'm going to then apply to this. And so you're looking upon it as in an iterative manner. Like I said, a lot of times when you go and develop code and it works, regardless of whether it's messy or whether it's clean, it works, and then you can give it away. Now, I know for a fact that I might be coming across here as someone who writes clean code without even thinking about writing clean code. I know for a fact in, say, 6 months' time, I'm going to be looking at the code that I've written today and going, why on earth did I do that? Why did I do that? So I'm certainly not perfect whatsoever, but I like to go through that sort of iterative process, especially if I was working with a client for a long period of time. I would request a period of self-evaluation, as in, let's look at what we've already created and see if we can improve it, see if we can actually trim off the fat and make it a little bit more efficient, effective, and so forth. And it takes a bold developer to do that. And I mentioned this in one of my talks, Software Complexities at PHP Southwest, that it's kind of like you kind of think that you have a table, and that table has many legs, and what you're trying to do is keep everything on the table nice and upright whilst you're unscrewing one of the table legs and changing it with another table leg, without everything collapsing down and breaking. So here you're looking at the legacy code that you've written to see if you can improve it without breaking it. And yeah, software development is an iterative process, and you yourself need to iteratively go over your own work. Because if you all just take the mentality of, yes, it works, and I'm just going to put it out there and forget about it, then the next time you come back to it, say in a few years' time, you'll be like, oh, I wish I went back to that earlier and tidied that up, because now I'm having to deal with all this mess. A lot of times I've done that. I mean, on my personal projects, I will say I would write something and I would give myself a set time to do that. I will put that live, and I won't give myself enough time to review that later on. And so I often go on, say, like if I was to go on holiday, I would often have an idea and go, oh, you know, I could improve it like that. I then come back to something that I created, say, a year ago with this new idea of how to improve it. But now I'm having to deal with a year-old code base because it's like I haven't touched it in a while. And I'm having to remember what I've done. So what I like doing is giving myself a portion of time to reevaluate what I've done before I go all gung-ho and change everything. As a freelancer, it's one of those things where it's kind of like there is a huge element of discoverability and investigation on what has currently already been put in place. And if you have unit tests and you run those and they fail, then that is a red flag, because it's like the code doesn't do what it says it should do already. So how are you going to improve it? So yeah, I mean, there's a lot, and it's not a case of just culling the unit tests because they fail. It's a case of why do they fail, and then sort of evaluating and investigating and going through that. Clean code, it's something that we all have to do, and it will come in time. It's something that you'll just improve without knowing it. It's not something that you just get clarity. It's not something like you don't wake up one morning and go, oh yeah, now I know how to write clean code. It's something that just comes, and it comes over experience, and it comes through the amount of projects that you've worked on. It comes through the amount of bugs that you've fixed, the amount of things that you've broken. There was someone on Twitter earlier talking about confidence and how when do you feel confident as a programmer? Well, you don't just wake up and go, yes, I'm confident. It comes through time. You don't realize you are confident when you're confident. You just are. And you know, one thing I would suggest is to break as much stuff as you possibly can do in a controlled environment, and learn how to fix those things. Because then when you come to something that you were working on later down the line, you then take those experiences with you, and everybody's a winner, right? But anyway, guys, it's coming up to the hour, and I've taken up too much of your time. Thank you ever so much for watching. Happy coding, everyone. I do appreciate the questions. Thank you ever so much, Luke 10 and Vinod and Claude RDZ. Thank you ever so much, guys. Happy coding. I'll see you again probably this time next week. Cheers. Bye.